Hi everyone, my name is Abby Morris, and this is my data analysis project in which I will be covering the ELL graduation rates for Pasadena ISD. So to start off, there's some important vocabulary that we need to cover. First of all, an ELL is an English language learner. Longitudinal completion rate, that's going to be the percentage of students from a class of first-time ninth graders who are able to complete high school by their anticipated graduation date. So that's going to be tracking students that start in ninth grade, and they should be completing 4 years after their start date. And then a graduate is going to be a student who graduates either early or on time. A continuing student is going to be a student who is still in high school after the graduation date. So if they're carrying on after their anticipated graduation date, they're considered a continuer. A GED recipient will have earned a GED by the graduation date. And then a dropout is a student who either drops out and does not graduate or doesn't return to school after their anticipated graduation date or does not earn a GED by the expected graduation date. When considering this data, I really try to pay attention to the continuous school improvement model that we've been working on in the Bernhardt text. So the first part of that is to take the data and multiple data points and be able to plan based on those data points. So then when you're making your plan for implementation, it's important to continuously evaluate and reflect on that data in order to improve. And so it's this real cycle that you have to go back and forth and just be open and honest and flexible with the data as you go. Okay, so into actually doing the numbers of the graduation rate. For federal accountability, campuses are evaluated on the graduation rate for their adequate yearly progress, or AYP. And then it also is used in the performance-based monitoring analysis system. So obviously graduation numbers are going to be very, very important for a school's funding and for a district's funding. And this is all according to the Division of Accountability and Research on the TEA website. And so the way they come up with this is they start with the number of graduates and put that over the graduates plus the continuers plus the GED recipients and plus the dropouts. So basically all of the students. They divide those two, and that's how they come up with a graduation rate. Okay, so looking at the Texas graduation rates, all of these are going to be the longitudinal graduation and dropout rates. They're a 6-year extended, and so they're watching students even after those initial 4 years. So as far as the continuers and the dropouts, the dropout category, you're still looking at these students past that initial 4 years. So this is the class of 2013, which kind of gets a little confusing. It's a class of 2013, but this data is reported as of fall 2015. So you can't report this data necessarily by year because you have to give students, if you're calculating the continuers, you have to give students a chance to actually come back and keep going and keep trying to earn their diploma. So I'm specifically interested in those lower subpopulations, the economically disadvantaged, the ELLs, and the special ed students. So if you look at the graduation rates here for the state, it's 90.9% for the overall graduation rate, where the economically disadvantaged graduation rate is 88.8, the ELLs is 78.8, and then the special education is 84. So obviously the ELLs are really struggling here statewide for their graduation rates. And then if you look over to the continuation, so these are the percentage of students that are going to keep going after their 4-year anticipated graduation rate. The continuers in ELL, it's 1.6%, and then special ed is 3.5%, whereas the state overall is 0.6%. So this is going to be the Pasadena ISD graduation rates, the longitudinal graduation rates. And you see here that you have the English language learners in grades 9 through 12. That's going to be 72.5%. And then the English language learners just from the last year is going to be 68.1%. It's going to be the graduation rate. Whereas you see special education, for example, is at 69, at risk is at 80.6. So our special populations are still struggling to carry on in Pasadena ISD. And then the continuation rates are also an important part of this and where I want to focus my analysis. So English language learners, their continuation rate is 8.1%, which is quite a bit more than the statewide average. Okay, so here are the numbers a little bit bigger, a little bit easier to see. So again, the ELLs in grade 9 through 12 is 72.5, where their continuation rate is 8.1%, and then the English language learners in the last year is 68.1, where their continuation rate is 7.5. And then you notice that the dropout rates are 18.8 for the ELLs in 9 through 12 and 24 for the ELLs in the last year. So when we compare this to the state, PISD has a smaller percentage of ELL students who graduate on time than the state average. 78.8% of ELL students graduate in the state, whereas 68.1% of ELL students graduate in PISD. So obviously you have a pretty big drop off there. So ELL students in PISD are not graduating at a rate as high as the state, but we do have a significantly larger percentage continuing after the anticipated graduation rate than the state as a whole. So we have a lot more students continuing on, a lot more ELL students continuing on after they miss that first graduation date. Although the percentage of students continuing is larger than the state, our dropout percentage is still essentially the same as the state. So through this data analysis, what I found is that PISD is missing a large group of ELL students who are continuing on after the first opportunity for graduation, but they are not completing. So we are missing tons of students there that are interested in going forward and moving forward and continuing with their education, but our dropout rate is still essentially the same as the state, even though we have more students continuing on, or a larger percentage continuing on. So the legal implications of graduation rates we kind of discussed earlier. You have your state accountability, federal accountability, and PBMAS. So it is very important that we find as many ways as possible to graduate as many students as possible, not just for funding, but for the overall good of the community and the good of our students. So I made some goals to address the problem. One is to increase the graduation rates for ELL students to at least reach state average, and then also to increase the number of ELL students who are graduating after continuation. So I think a lot about the term or the motto that all means all. Every student, every day, and that has to include graduation. So although it is reasonable to expect some students in special populations to maybe go a little bit slower in coursework than the traditional graduation pace, we still have a responsibility to ensure that all students have an opportunity for graduation. So there are two significant issues based on this data that I found. Obviously, initial graduation, and that's something we talk a lot about in PISD, but the group that we don't talk as much about is those that are continuing on after the initial miss. So a program to support ELL initial graduation, one of my goals would be to strengthen the Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol, the SIOP model that we use to support our ELL students in Pasadena ISD. So for the action steps, all teachers in the school, which would not just be the ones designated as SIOP, will be formally trained in the SIOP program. So we offer that in our district, and usually you just have to attend that if you actually have a class designated as SIOP, but I think it would be beneficial to all of our students to have their teachers trained in that protocol so that they can provide the support that our kids need. And then teachers in vulnerable subjects for ELLs, which especially would be English 1 and 2 and Algebra 1, will attend the English as a Second Language Institute and then sit for a supplementary certification, which will be provided by the district. I thought that extra training and that extra emphasis on ELLs through the ESL Institute would help teachers to better support their ELL students. The Campus SIOP Peer Facilitator, which we have been provided through Title I funds, so every school has one. here in Passing ISD is going to take on more of a role of the instructional coach for PSYOP teachers and move some of that paperwork to our ESL master clerk that doesn't necessarily have to be done by the peer facilitator. The campus PSYOP peer facilitator will also be present at English and Algebra 1 PLC sessions for at least once a month to offer planning support. And that can help just to make sure that kids are getting what they need and they're getting the support they need throughout their classes. And our expert, our facilitator, can help with that process. Another goal that I have for our ELL students continuing is to graduate the entire percentage of ELL students continuing after missing initial graduation. So if you are going to come back to school and you are going to come back and keep working towards your degree and working towards your diploma, you need a different type of support than an initial group of students. So I want to continue offering the ELL students the same PSYOP supports that they've always had. But also they need to be assigned a teacher mentor to check in with them every other week bi-monthly, to check in and reflect with them and just make sure that they have someone who has their back and who's going to guide them through this process, because obviously they're going to need some extra support. Continuing ELL students will also be assigned a student tutor for support through their most vulnerable subject areas. So if they especially struggle with algebra, then they can be assigned maybe an upper level math student to help them in algebra. To evaluate the new program, we are going to monitor students' work with their mentors and student tutors through the PLC model. And we're also going to survey ELL students once a month to gauge the feelings of comfort and concern and the specific needs they'd like to address, as well as do specific data pulls for continuing ELL students on our common formative assessments and our 6 weeks assessments.